So in this video I'm going to explain how to do game 2 from Prep Test 51. I call this the Hotel Suites game because that's what it's about. We have 6 players. They're being ranked from first to last, first to sixth. We don't have any ties, and so we do have a 1-to-1 ratio of players to positions. Okay. We have a mix of rules here. The first rule is a relative position rule, with one player being closer to the left than the other in our little diagram. The second rule is a relative position rule that's conditional. Okay, so they're adding an if-then statement to the mix, and the conditions in that if-then statement are relative positions. So the first one reads, if G is higher than H, then J is higher than K and L. So that's how this statement would read. That's not what the rule says, but that's how you would translate the rule into a positive if-then statement. Okay. The contrapositive is going to change that and to an or. Okay, so that's a key component. And so if K is higher than J or L is higher than J, then H will be higher than G. The reason I can just flip them when I negate is because there's no option for them to be tied. Okay, so if I were to negate this statement, but it's possible that J and L could be tied, I wouldn't be able to just flip to, well, if J is not higher than L, L must be higher than J, because it's possible that they could be tied. All right, so this kind of flipping that I've done here, so you can see it's a little bit simpler with H and G. That's only acceptable as a negation if those are the only two options. So if it's true that not having G higher than H is the same thing as H being higher than G. Okay, so rule 3 we'll see is actually going to cover the scenarios where H is higher than G. So if H before G, then we're going to have K before J and L. All right, so you can follow along if you have access to the game. Otherwise, it's not going to make a whole lot of sense, but you can maybe glean a little bit about how to create contrapositives when you have these relative position rules involved. All right, so creating the contrapositive for this one, we would have to flip these guys, right? So if J is before K, we change that and to an or L is before K, then G has to be before H. In the context of this game, that's not really going to help us too much. So the contrapositives here aren't really too relevant, at least with the method that I would use for this game, which involves world splitting. But the reason for that is because we have two scenarios, two triggers that are negations of one another, and they cover all of the possible scenarios. So either G is before H or H is before G. One of those two things is going to happen. So I can just create a world where G is before H and another world where H is before G, and those worlds together will cover all of the possible scenarios, all of the possible outcomes. The final rule is a complex OR rule. That's probably how I would label it, and that's based on having read the LSAT trainer and some of the drills in there. Complex OR rule makes sense to me. So it's a fairly complicated rule. It involves 3 different players, and we have or and not both, which we could look at as a biconditional, but we can also just boil it down to a single or statement. So in this case, we have F before G or F before H, but we can't have both of those at the same time. So the situation that we can't have is F being before G and H. So if I already know that F is before G, I can't put H after F therefore H has to be before F. And if I already know that F is before H, I can't put G after F, so G must be before F. So what it boils down to is F has to be between G and H. We just don't know whether H is before G or G is before H, but F has to be between them. And so that works out really nicely with what we have up here, right? So if G is before H, we know F is just going to be somewhere between them in terms of relative position. So overall, if we want to create the two possible worlds here, all we really have to do is start with the first rule and then work our way down. So H is before L. Let's trigger this one first. So G before H. What's the consequence of that? J is going to be before L. J is also going to be before K. And then rule 4 states that F has to be between these two, right? In this world where G is before H, rule 3 is irrelevant. It's not being triggered. Okay, and we'll start at the top again and show what happens if we trigger rule 3 instead. So H before L. Okay, but now H is going to be before G as well. K will be before L, and K is also before J, and then F has to be between H and G. So I'll just put F there, H and G, and this would be the world when we trigger rule 2, and this is the world when we trigger rule 3. Okay, but like I said, because those two cover the only possibilities in the relative positions of G and H in this game, because there are no ties, right? G and H cannot be tied, so these cover the only relative positions of those two players. Then those are the two worlds that we're dealing with. So here we can't boil it down to like concrete positions, right? Like the absolute positions of those players, but we can boil it down to their relative positions to at least one other player, right? Each player's relative position to at least one other player. And then we would have to work with it like a web game. Okay, so if we want to talk about the web and how to read a web diagram, and that's kind of another topic, but I'll just show you one thing quickly. So with webs, we're often concerned about who can be first and who can be last. That's one of the first things we sort of check. So in this first world, G and J could be first. Okay, so we can stretch J over here because there actually isn't any player that needs to be before J, right? We just know that L and K have to be after J. And then the players that could be last are L and K. In this world, the players that could be first are K and H, and the players that could be last are J, L, and G. So the only player that is never going to be either first or last is F. Okay. So F can't be first and F can't be last, which really we could get that just from looking at rule 4, that F can't be first or last. Okay, and question 8 for this game actually is answered by knowing that. Yeah. Okay. If you have any questions about this or about web games, just let me know. Let me know if there are any games that you're struggling with in particular and that you'd like me to review. Okay.